topic I'm going to talk to you today is incorporating different aspects of crop rotation to manage populations of resistant pigweeds. Now, we've seen a lot of pictures this morning with shots from fields infested with glyphosate-resistant pigweeds. Well, here's some shots from Mississippi of everything else. And we pretty much have the entire delta seeded with pigweeds at this point. In Mississippi, we currently have, I believe, 11 counties that we know have resistant pigweeds in them. That number is for sure to go up as we continue the screening programs through the remainder of the fall and into the winter. 10 of those 11 counties are located in the delta area of the state, which for those of you that are less familiar with Mississippi, we pretty much consider that the northwest one-fourth of the state. And then all of the counties that border the Mississippi River are currently infested with glyphosate-resistant pigweed. Now, I took these pictures, I think back in September, but this is pictures from Highway 82 between Greenville, Mississippi, and the old Greenville Bridge across the river. And for those of you that are from the general area of Greenville, you know that Farmers Grain Terminal sits under the foot of the old bridge just across the river in Arkansas. So this is the median and the shoulder on the westbound lanes headed towards the river and in the general direction of Farmers Grain. This picture, I walked directly through the median in the ditch, turned back around, face towards Greenville, and you can see the difference. This is road completely lined with pigweeds on either side on the westbound side. I won't say there's not any pigweeds on the eastbound side of Highway 82, but there's infinitely more on the westbound side. And I also won't say that all those pigweed seeds came out of grain trucks headed towards the river, but 2 + 2 = 4, so you do the math on that. All right, down to my specific topic. I tell people in Mississippi, I think we have two real opportunities for managing pigweeds in the delta, particularly on our side of the delta. And we have some really good yield potential with rice, and obviously Arkansas does as well. But pretty much all of the counties in the delta have excellent yield potential for corn. So those are the two that I kind of want to focus in on today is first corn and then rice, and using those crops to manage populations of pigweeds. Now, I went back to some of Dr. Oliver's class notes and some of the textbooks that he used when we were in school just to look at what are the benefits of crop rotation, keeping in mind that you're using the rotation to manage a resistant weed population. And the first point here is that you can break a continuous cycle of a crop-weed association, because a lot of times an environment that's favorable for one particular crop is also favorable for a particular weed. If you think about barnyard grass and rice, very similar plant types. They both favor an aquatic environment. Therefore, barnyard grass proliferates heavily in a rice crop. Personally, I think Palmer pigweed and cotton are two that are closely associated. They have a lot of the same, requirements for growth. The one that comes immediately to mind is, soil temperature requirements for germination. They seem to come up about the same time in the spring. The second aspect of this is rotating crops that have contrasting growth styles. I mentioned a little bit about this a second ago, but for instance, you rotate a row crop with a drill seeded crop. Bob mentioned about drill seeding soybeans as a way to supplement your Palmer pigweed control program. So narrower rows, canopy quicker, shade out the ground, prevent additional pigweeds from germinating after canopy closure. And then finally, what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is rotating your weed management tools. And obviously, the big component of this is rotating herbicide chemistries, but then also manipulating some of your cultural tools, such as flooding or planting date, to, again, supplement your weed management program. So on this table, I have several herbicide families or modes of action listed here in the left-hand column, and then I added some of the common herbicide trade names that are representative of that family or mode of action. And then where you see plus signs over here in the crop columns, the plus signs represent that a herbicide of that mode of action is available for use in that crop. And so you hear a lot of us talk about in our county meetings, state meetings, rotate chemistries, rotate herbicide modes of action. I know Arkansas in their MP44 lists modes of action in the weed response tables. In Mississippi, we intend to have this same information in our weed control guide in the near future. But just because you're rotating a crop doesn't mean you're rotating herbicides. For instance, ALS inhibitors. You have access to ALS inhibitors in all 4 of the major row crops in the Delta, same with the PPO-ACE inhibitors. So you got to be conscious of not only the crop that you're growing, but also the herbicide that you're using in that crop. And the 2 to focus in on are down here at the bottom, the synthetic auxins, which is 2,4-D, dicamba, grandstand, and rice, and then the HPPD inhibitors, which are used right now solely in corn, but these would be, Callisto and Lawless would be 2 examples of these. And you notice that we don't have herbicides in either of these chemistries or families available for in-crop use in cotton or soybeans. So just starting out with corn, again, at least on our side of the Delta, I think corn is an excellent rotation crop for either soybeans or cotton. Again, we have access to excellent chemistry to control pigweeds in corn, particularly the HPPDs and the synthetic auxins. And you can use your planting date. I'll show some data in a minute, but use your planting date to avoid Palmer amaranth. Plant early before the pigweeds start emerging. But the big thing in corn is right here. We've heard several people mention seed production, and I'm going to say it probably 10 or 12 times again before I get finished. But avoiding seed production after harvest is a major aspect of managing a population of pigweeds in corn. So this is just some data from a trial that we did this past summer, just really showing different representative chemistries from the different modes of action that are available in corn. These are single herbicide applications at V4 corn, so a little bit later application, no tank mixes with Roundup or atrazine, just single herbicide applications. You can see that the HPPDs, Lawless and Callisto, they're right up near the top, 85 to 90%. Then you got the next little group here is Yukon and Status. Those are both premixes that contain dicamba, so they're synthetic auxins. And then you come down to the bottom, you have Cadet, which is a PPO-ACE inhibitor, applied on a little bit larger weed. It's contact herbicide. Coverage wasn't quite good enough to get adequate control. And then Resolve Q, which is an ALS inhibitor. 50 to 60% of the pigweeds that have gone through the screening programs at Stoneville are ALS resistant, and I would say 90+% of the pigweeds in my fields at the research station in Stoneville are ALS resistant. So Resolve, not really a good option there. I would like to point out here the atrazine. Dr. Nichols mentioned this morning about the uncertainty of the future with atrazine, and if we lose atrazine, then we'll get a group together similar to this next year and talk about managing pigweeds in corn. Because without glyphosate and without atrazine, pigweed management in corn becomes very complicated pretty quickly. All right, I mentioned about manipulating planting date to supplement your pigweed control program. So on this chart, you've got 3 planting dates, March 15, April 5, and April 21, which for my purposes roughly simulated an early, mid, and late planting date. Probably should have been about 10 days earlier than they were to be real world, but this is what the weather allowed us to do in 2010. So these individual bars represent our residual herbicide application time, and we had a pre-application, application at V2 corn, or an application at V4 corn. And really the only 2 things that I'd like you to notice here is the blue bar. When we planted early, we're able to delay that herbicide application to V4, which is basically as late as we could go with the height restriction on atrazine. And that's the best corn we cut, over 200 bushels. All right, when we delay the planting to the middle planting date, our best yield was produced with a pre-application of a residual herbicide. All right, so here, the soil's still a little bit cool, not many pigweeds coming up, in a couple weeks following this planting date. We get out here into the 1st of April. It was warmer last year in late April, or late March and early April, than it probably usually is in Stoneville. so we got our best yield at the mid-planting date with the pre-application. So we introduce the residual herbicide into the system at the point when it's needed most, and that's when the pigweeds are emerging. So you can supplement the control program there by using the combination of the residual herbicide and the planting date. All right, I mentioned the seed production, and this is a big pet peeve of everybody right now that's dealing with pigweeds. You can see pigweeds growing back up after corn harvest at the top, and then this is actually a picture that Dr. Smith sent me. You can see pigweed seed there. This picture I took at Stoneville, but all the little black dots you see on the ground, those are all pigweed seed that came out the back of a combine. So particularly in corn and also in early planted soybeans, it wasn't uncommon to see combines running the last week of July in Mississippi this year harvesting corn, but for sure we get ramped up good most every year the first couple of weeks of August. So depending on what the weather does between early August and say the middle of November, you can have 2 to 3 or 4 months of good growing conditions where those pigweeds are going to grow up, produce seed, and cause you problems in successive years. So every effort that you made in growing corn with the intent of managing a resistant pigweed population can go right out the window after you harvest, and you move on to cutting the rest of your corn, cutting your soybeans, cutting your rice, picking cotton, whatever else that you have to do in the fall. So once you harvest, don't forget about the fields. They need additional attention after that point. So we kind of tried to address this year and kind of got a late start on it. This is actually some data from Dr. Daniel Stevenson with LSU down at Alexandria. I had this same trial at Stoneville, but unfortunately where I put mine, we didn't have any pigweeds come up. So Daniel sent me his data, and these are just some different programs after harvest. 2 applications of herbicide. These are spaced about 3 weeks apart, with the first one occurring 2 weeks after harvest. Flail mow and then come back about 3 weeks later and use a non-selective herbicide, or disc the field a couple of weeks after harvest and then come back and spray 3 weeks later. And for 2010, when, for instance, it didn't rain at my house from the 1st of August until about 2 weeks ago, it really didn't matter what you did as long as you did something after harvest. You back up to 2009 when we got most of our corn out or part of our corn out, and then the rain set in September, and then we didn't do anything for 5 or 6 weeks. You have some real problems depending on the fall. But for 2010 at least, it really didn't matter what you did to control pigweeds after harvest as long as you were aware of the problem and went out there and did something. But again, that could change dramatically from year to year. All right, moving on to rice, which is where I spend a lot of my time during the summer. In Mississippi, I would say at least 90+% of our rice is grown in a 1-to-1 rotation. With soybeans, it's probably more like 93 to 95%. But we have some real opportunities in rice for managing populations of pigweeds as well. My personal favorite is combinations of propanil and grandstand, but then you got the flood, and you can't beat a flood for managing a Palmer pigweed. Dr. Oliver mentioned this morning about it coming, from the Rio Grande area of Texas. Well, there's not too many flooded areas in the Rio Grande part of Texas. So if we can flood a field and maintain that flood, we can really do a good job on controlling a weed that's native to an arid climate. But then, as with corn, there's always one big drawback, and that's preventing seed production on the levees. You can see in this picture at the bottom right, some of these big plants, for instance, this one right here, that's actually a volunteer soybean, but many of these plants scattered out around this rice field are pigweeds. And then that levee right there, this particular grower hasn't seeded his levees, so that's even a better site for pigweeds. So even though they'll survive the flood, they will absolutely thrive on a levee throughout the summer. So this slide just shows how Palmer amaranth control can kind of incorporate into a general rice weed control program targeting grass and broadleaf weeds. And really the main bar is the bar at the top. Super Wham plus grandstand at a mid-post timing, which for me and my program, that's probably a 3 to 4 leaf timing, 3 3 to 4 leaf rice timing. So usually about 3 weeks after the rice comes up is when that application is going to go out. The second bar is broadhead. Some of you may not be familiar with broadhead. It's a premix of quinclorac or facet, Quinstar plus AIM. Broadhead, in the limited experience that I have with it, has done a very good job on very small pigweeds. It has done a very poor job on larger pigweeds because one of the components of it, and the one that's doing the major effort on controlling the pigweeds, is the AIM component. AIM is a contact herbicide, needs excellent coverage, and obviously is going to work better the smaller the weed. One other thing to point out here, and it'll be obvious on the next slide, AIM permit, again, a lot of glyphosate-resistant pigweeds, ALS-resistant pigweeds in our fields at Stoneville. So we only get about, 63, 65% control with AIM plus permit. But if we can injure those plants and then get water on them, in 10 days to 2 weeks, it seems like even though they didn't die from the herbicide application, they'll melt down and die a lot quicker if they were at least injured by a herbicide than ones where we didn't treat at all and you just strictly use the water to manage those pigweeds. I've seen those probably take 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on how big they were when you put the water on them. You can see at the top I talked about the target size with a product like broadhead or really anything containing AIM. That's your target size. Bob showed what a 1-inch pigweed looked like this morning. Same thing as with FlexStar with AIM. The smaller the better for control, just from a coverage standpoint. And we just see way too much of this in the rice field. We wait till that pre-flood timing to treat most of our broadleaf weeds, and at that point they're just too big. And even though the flood is going to control the pigweed that's there, when you put the water on it, you still got, depending on how long it is from the time you put the rice seed in the ground until you flood it, there's 4 to 5 weeks of competition that's going on there. So if that pigweed population is thick enough, you can incur some real yield losses due to competition before you're able to get the water on it. But the big bad boy in rice is the levees. And if you leave the pigweed on the levee and it makes seed, then it's just like allowing Palmer pigweed to go to seed after corn harvest. Every effort that you've made in managing that population to help your soybean crop the following year is pretty much going to go out the window, because once you swipe that levee down, get that field back in shape to come back and put your soybeans in the next year, you're going to do a pretty good job of evenly spreading those seed that were produced on the levees across the field. I've done several weed control trials on levees. I've never had pigweeds in those studies, so I actually pulled some data from Dr. Noisworthy that they had done over here in Arkansas a couple years ago. And really what you're going to see on that chart is nothing does a real good job at controlling pigweeds on levees. The first thing, these plants were probably 18 to 24, maybe even 30 inches tall at the time of application. We're ordinarily spraying later in the season on levees. So propanil and 2,4-D was the best treatment that they had in this particular data set. And this is not in their article, I don't believe, but in my opinion, I don't know if I'm really that caught up on killing a pigweed on a levee. I just want you to keep that pigweed from making seed on the levee. Particularly if you're in an area where you haven't seeded the levees and you're not in it to supplement your per acre grain yield, then really what I'd like to see you do is just do whatever you got to do to keep it from making seed. So just quick points of summary. We didn't go into all the other benefits of crop rotation, breaking up disease cycles, insect cycles, nematode cycles, improving your soil condition. That's all